From the high mountains of the great Southwest Canadian Rockies, I bid you all good evening, good morning, good afternoon, whatever the case may be, wherever you are in this world, of which is covered by this radio program. Welcome to Dark Matter Radio. My name is Ronnie McLean, and we're going to have a very interesting program already, I can tell. We're going to dive deep into the infinite universe and all its possibilities. So hold on tight, grab a cup of coffee, some tea, whatever tobacco products you might be smoking, and settle in for a very, very interesting program.
Because tonight we're going to be talking about some very interesting things, and we're going to get back into the subject of reparations tonight. So here on Dark Matter Radio, if you're listening on YouTube, please subscribe and like. If you're listening on Daily Motion, another one of our channels, please subscribe and share also. And we would like to let you know that we're going to be starting our own. We did find another format. We're going to be using another format to start another radio program. And we're going to be having 24-hour Indigenous programming for quite some time. We're going to be doing some really good things. And if you're listening on the program on the Infinite Universe, Ronnie McLean, the website, I'll leave a link down there. Thank you, and I bid you all good afternoon, good morning, good evening. Again, whatever the case may be. Again, we're going to talk about reparations. Now, I haven't done anything lately on the reparations because I wanted the whole entire debate about reparations to really settle in with people. I wanted to really hear a lot of the things that people are saying about reparations. I wanted to really get the Kamala Harrises out there and all those other type of people out there that are talking about, reparations. Now, I told you about a year and a half ago, that during this presidential election, reparations was not only going to come up, it was going to be a cornerstone of the political process that they're going to be talking about. I also told you that they're going to not only talk about reparations, but talk about, how much money they should give out to people. And who should be distributing that money isn't there yet, but we'll get into that. Because we're going to talk about, again, the 3 to 4 steps that need to be taken before you can even begin to talk about reparations. And, again, a lot of people, think, when I'm doing my shows and stuff like that, and I'm bringing out all this information, talking about the doctrine of discovery, talking about decolonization, talking about reparations, and all those different types of things, such as ADOS, Americans, descendants of slaves, or whatever you want to call anybody these days. Even when I get into, everything they told you was a lie about, who you truly are as being a person. And I'm listening and hearing a lot of people talk about, they're Indians and they're this tribe and that tribe. And remember, as we're getting into this conversation, the intelligence of our conversation has to be one that is going to take place where people are going to recognize our intelligence. Because, again, if we're using their definitions, and this is what they want to do, they want to frame the language, they want to frame the argument in their language. They want to put the language out there, and then they want you to use their language. How do I know this? Because this is what I do for a living. This is what I studied. Politics. I'm a political scientist. I study it. I've run campaigns. I've been in campaigns. I've won political campaigns. And I have a very, very, very good understanding working with people such as Erling Hooper Hill, who's been in office up until here this recently past couple of years, for almost 27 years, and other legislatures for county, state, congressional, and even senatorial operations that I've worked on. And also been in charge of the Black Caucus of Florida, actually, in the Hernando County area. And very interesting, when you're learning all these different things and how they structure political campaigns, they have to use the wording, right? The wording has to be the dialect. The wording has to be instituted in a way where they can use it and then use your own wordings against you. So when you're using their definitions and using their concepts, framing is what it's called, political framing. When they frame the argument for you, and then you go into that argument and you begin to start using what they're talking about, what happens is that you automatically 100% lose the argument. So when you begin to start looking at rats in a maze, this is exactly what it is. Black people, so-called black people, are nothing more than rats in a maze. Now, I know people don't like to hear that, but you have to understand, the concepts on how they're playing you in this political game. And what they're doing is that they framed all the wording, including, the people that went in front of Congress, and they framed the argument. And if you notice, part of that framing of the argument was that we don't want any checks, right? As though you're just nothing but a bunch of low lives people who don't want nothing more than just an economic payout. Well, that's just nothing more than a slap in the face. And a lot of people were, they're saying there's nothing wrong with that, right? There's nothing wrong with that. We don't want no checks or anything else like that. Well, the whole process of reparations is the restoration of a wrong that was done. Recompense also has to be in that genre. And also there's a few other things that we're going to be talking about in just a few seconds that need to be done and need to be understood, that it's not just about the descendants of slaves. And see, and this is where they get you. This is where they got you in terms of all of the programming that they put in your mind for over 50 years. Right? They put in the programming that you're black. They put in the programming that you're an African American. Right? They change you from the designation that they gave you in the very beginning as an American Indian or an Indigenous American, right? What they found you here. And then they classify you as a Negro and anything else that they can classify you in. And you use those terms with pride. You use those terms without prejudice. And you use those terms as those are the original terms upon which, as a people, we have called ourselves. Not even thinking about the antediluvian type records. Right? Not even thinking about what happened in the land that they call Lemuria. Right? The continent that sunk into the sea. Not even thinking about all of the things that happened with the with those records of Thoth. Right? One of the last main survivors of the Atlanteans who had actually written down a record. Right? Nobody's really going back into a lot of these things, and I'm really having to bring this out because this all goes into reparations. See, because if you don't know exactly who and what you are and you can't frame your own language, you will never be on the right track to get anything right for yourself. Now, I'm not talking down to anybody. I'm talking up to a lot of people because I'm talking up to the level of the people that have an understanding, that know what's actually truly going on. Right? And depending upon the educational level and your waking up stage and where you are, you need to understand that, when you're calling yourself an Indian, that is not the original language or the original term that you was associated with when they first came over here. You also have to understand that the Europeans, what they did, and also the Africans and the Moors and the Chinese and the rest of this earth with a lot of these created beings, what they have done was that they framed the work and they changed the names of everything. Everything. Right? And so you have to really go back deep into your history. You got to dive deep into your universal consciousness. You got to dive deep into the Akashi records in order for you to begin to start understanding who and what you are and what you actually really deserve on this land. Right? So you need to really begin to start having an understanding of the truth of the matter of why they want to frame reparations just as descendants of slaves. Because it's more than just the descendants of slaves. And I'm sorry for you ADSO people. Sorry for you guys. Right? But you are also included in that. But it's not about you and it's not just about that. And it is a travesty that any so-called black, so-called indigenous leader makes it anything like that, right? It's not only even about being indigenous. It's not only even about being indigenous, right? It's what it's about, and this is one of the first things that we need to begin to start understanding. What it's really about is about what has happened and the destruction of the rebuilding of our civilization after the Great Calamity. Now, many of you people don't even know what the Great Calamity is. And those great calamities were the calamities that destroyed Lemuria and that destroyed Atlantis, right? That had a great traumatic effect on the oceans, on the water levels, on the sea rise, on what happened to the landmass. Right? So there's a lot of things that we need to actually understand and do in order for us to be able to understand what reparation is all about. Right? Because one, reparation isn't about a check. And again, I have to go back to that and saying that if you're talking about a check and you're saying it's about a check, that is just a slap in the face of every so-called copper-colored person in the Americas. And I say in the Americas. Not only just North America. And for many of you, I need to understand that North America is not only the Americas, the American area, but it's also the Canadian areas, all of North America. And I have to pinpoint on that because I had some indigenous chiefs asking me, why am I in Canada doing things in America? Well, the bottom line is that it's North America and this is all of our lands, and I don't respect any of these borders, right? We're even going to begin to start talking about Mexico being part of North America, right? The only reason why I'm sticking with the North American continent, which is part of Mexico, but I'm talking about the American and Canada, is because we know for a fact that only 500,000 real Africans, or no, less than 300,000 Africans, actually came on the shores of the Americas, of the American site, this corporation land, in 500 years. We know that, right? Which makes 98% of the people already here. So we establish that, right? We also establish that, the original definition of an American was copper-colored beings, right? The copper-colored indigenous beings that they found here on the earth that now are applied to Europeans. So, so the first thing we need to begin to start recognizing is that there's a larger history than the history that they're giving us. You have to understand that, right? So if you want to talk about reparations, you got to talk about that. There's a larger history here. It's not just about what happened during slavery. And this is one of the, somebody said, you really need to run for the presidency of the United States, get into one of these debates and really put the record straight. Because these phonies and these fakes that are up there right now, I don't know how good-hearted they are, calling you all kinds of names and stuff like that, really disrespecting you, and bringing to a point as to where they're just talking to you as though you're just a bunch of stupid idiots, which you are not. Which you are not. A lot of our people are hurting out there. A lot of our people are in pain. And they're in pain because of the system. They're in pain because they don't know how to work the system. They're in pain because they don't know how to deal with or operate in a co-community type situation because of what has been done to the civilization. Remember, over 100 million of our forefathers have been slaughtered. And that slaughtering is still going on to this very day. All right? So it's more than just about slavery. And slavery wasn't really slavery. Slavery was an internment from war, right? Because we're all still prisoners of war. So, during that first concept, we need to understand that it's not just about the current language that they're trying to frame us in the context of, which is slavery, ADOS. It's not just about, indigenous people or Indians or American Indians. It goes much deeper than that. The wording has to be, it goes into the prisoners of war, which the war has never ended. Goes into the prisoners of war and the prisoners of wars that are still alive today. So when they say there are no slaves alive today, There are descendants of slaves that are alive today, yes, but when you talk about prisoners of war, we are still prisoners of war exiled in our own land. And until we have an understanding of that wording, and that's the wording that needs to be put out there, because it was a war against our own people. We need to get that understood, get that straight. Right? So in the first concept of this, we need to understand that it's about the context of the wording, and the wording is not just slavery. Right? And the wording probably shouldn't be slavery at all. The wording should be prisoner of war. Prisoners of war. Not even indentured servants. Prisoners of war. And the remnants of the prisoners of war. Because what happened is, as they were slaughtering and killing all the people, they were turning them into labor camps, free labor camps, prisoner of war camps, and then prisoner of war labor camps. Right? So when they say that that this country was not built on the backs of free labor, it wasn't. It was built on the backs of the prisoners of war that was forced to do that labor in concentration camps. And what were these concentration camps? These concentration camps were dotted all over the Slough, and they called them plantations. Why were they plantations? Because that's where they planted all the food. But there was a lot more other things that were going on other than plantations as well. Right? And no matter what you talk about, even in the North, all right, the what you call free blacks, or even in their own little areas, they still weren't really free. Because they had no rights under the Constitution. Because the Constitution wasn't made for them. And it wasn't. And that's another debate for another day. But when you talk about reparations, you have to understand that very simple fact. The other thing is that as a being of populace of people, it's number two, the being of populace of people, we cannot talk about reparations until we all live in co-community, organized communities. We cannot talk about reparations until we live in organized co-communities all throughout the United States. Until we begin to start reestablishing ourselves in these community bunches and begin to start advocating for ourselves on a larger scale as a country of people. Right? We have to have a main council, Congress, don't care what you call it, representing us to the rest of the world. That has to be done. So we have to faction ourselves in co-creation communities. And these co-creation communities are the same type of communities that we came out of as we was reestablishing ourselves after the Great Calamity. These were beneficial communities, communities where nobody wanted for anything, and communities that were flourishing and thriving, and we were teaching the Europeans on how to work in those co-creation communities as well. This is how they stole our governmental process. And the same with the Native Americans. They also stole our governmental process, where they began to start wearing the overheaded bling of their headdresses and all that other type stuff. That again is a story for another day. But we need to begin to start living in co-creation communities, and we need to begin to start combining ourselves in small congresses, in our small congresses or councils, and our co-creation communities. And then those co-creation communities will have representation, at least 2 or 3, that will go into a main Congress or a main council, a great council that will represent the majority of people of what you call black, African American, copper-colored people all across this land, including Canada. Then we have some representation. Then we can begin to start making the declarations that we need to make in terms of us being autonomous and free. So nobody can see this is the other thing that people are slipping into, and that is really amazing to see, that they are so heck on bent and getting the government to recognize who they are. The government recognizes my people, and they're still going after the government to recognize their people. See, anytime that you go after a government grant, you're getting them to recognize you. You need to recognize and understand who you are for yourself from within yourself. excuse me, from within yourself. And from within yourself, you'll begin to start understanding the true master, the true being of who you are from within inside of yourself. You'll begin to start understanding what the creator of the universe, the God that is put inside of you, is able to do in terms of creating things, because you are a creator. That's what you are. And we are co-creators with one another's, even if we're doing it within chaos, because that's what we are, chaos beings. And again, you know, when you listen to Brother Polite, when you listen to a lot of the other brothers that are out there, Bobby Hemmett and a lot of these other people, they talk about some of these kinds of terminologies. But the problem is that we're not putting these terminologies into use in terms of moving us forward as a being of people. So a third thing we have to understand and recognize before we even begin to start talking about reparations is creating that great grand council, having a voice to speak for us all. Many flags, one nation. Many flag, one council. Many flags, one Congress. Nobody's trying to take away your autonomy, because there are no leaders out here. And that's one thing we need to know about ourselves. We are not governed by leadership. Right? You're so used to having a leader because they put a leader in front of you. Now they're putting Kamala Harris. They're putting these other people out there in front of you. These are your leaders now. These leaders don't even talk to you in the proper sense. They don't even give you the respect that you need. And in fact, if you look deep in some of these people's history, you'll find out they're more of an enemy to you than they are a friend. But they're after your vote. So when I talk about the vote, that is the thing. As long as we're energizing this system through our energy, they have power over us and they have power over everything else. It is our power that we're giving to them for them to control us. This is the reason why co-creation communities are extremely important, because what we need to do is take our energy and begin to start using it for ourselves and nothing else. We need to start a separate, a sealed economy for ourselves. So then that way we can begin to start hiring our own people, creating our own industries, creating our own farming. And then we can begin to start the process of cleansing our system, so then that way we can be procreators and co-creators. Right? So it's extremely important for us to understand that we need to take that process and do that what has to be done. And you know, we're doing we're going to be doing a speaking engagement at a place in Virginia in October. More information is going to come out on that, where you know things are happening in this co-creation sense. So until we begin to start thinking about us being co-creators and working together and understanding who we are deep down inside as individuals, and then understanding who we are as family people, and then understanding who we are as community people, and then understanding who we are as beings of people, as a collective, we cannot even begin to think about talking about reparations. Why? Because when they talk about reparation, they talk about how is it going to be administered. And we can't administer it until we ourselves have an operation in place that we know that works, that we can trust, that can minister our own healing to ourselves. So you never go to a doctor that was in charge of creating the problem, the experimentations, the killings, and all that other type stuff on your family members. You have to separate yourself from that. If you're an abused person, you need to get yourself out of the abused situation completely, and then sever ties with that abuser. And as long as you're accepting anything from this abuser, you're not severing ties, and you're a party to the abuse. Right? You're a party to the abuse. So if you had a sexual abuse situation or some sort of an abuse situation going on in your family, and you're encouraging that person who's being abused to go to that person who abused them for a recommendation for their healing, you are a party to that abuse. So anybody, minister, preacher, politician, doctor, reverend, whatever you want to call yourself, I don't care. lawyer, whatever, Indigenous chief, whatever, I don't care. If you are encouraging them to go to the person or the people or the government who is in charge of creating the problem, to the attune as to where they killed almost, or more than, not almost, but more than 100 million of our people, then you are a part of that problem and should not be part of the co-creation process. So these are the things that we have to separate ourselves out of. And I just got to speak honestly and plainly before you can even talk about reparations, because you have to do the litmus test. Do you care about your own people? And if you care about your own people, then you care about their freedom and their independence. Then a lot of people say, well, the American government is our government. No, it's not our government. And if you understand what happened on this world and in this earth, what happened with the Roman Empire, what happened with Christendom, what happened with all the things that went on with the Islamic empires, what happened, what went on with the Babylonian empires, what happened when they infiltrated Atlantis and they infiltrated Lemuria and all these kinds of things. I mean, when you go back, deep back into your history, when you have an understanding what happened with this, you'll understand that this system is nothing more than it's not a recreation, it is a continuation of the infestation that had happened a long time ago, and they are just running it under a different type of game, under a different type of name. That's what they're doing. And when you begin to start understanding that you can weed out these people just by co-creation, because co-creation means that we're going to be doing everything we need to do to make sure that we rise out of our situation. And if we're not rising out of our situation, that means that there are progenitors inside of these units that are preventing it from happening. And they're very easy to see, because it's not hard for us to be able to rise ourselves out of the situation given the type of environment that we're in. And right now what we're in is a carbon 12 to a carbon 7 environment. This is the reason why so many people are awakening. The other thing that you have to think about is, before we can even talk about reparations, is decolonization. And even before decolonization, or at the same time, we have to get rid of the doctrine of discovery. The doctrine of discovery is one of the things that has put the modern world, that they hurriedly put together so quickly, in enslavement. We have to get rid of the doctrine of discovery, and then we can talk about decolonization and a lot of the other different types of things that we can do. And all these things, a lot of these things may have to happen simultaneously, because they are working very rapidly to put their system in place. And if you don't believe me, go read the Georgia Guidestones. You don't believe me? Go read Agenda 21 and Agenda 30 from the UN. And that's another thing, because what happens is when you begin to start talking about a lot of this other stuff, we start talking about making sure that we have our own United Nations on the carbon side to deal with the United Nations on the world side, on their system side. We should not be dealing with any of these governments, period, at all. But we need to get ourselves into a co-creation type situation in order for us to be able to do what needs to be done. And what needs to be done is for us to begin to start co-creating with one another. This is the reason why, I'm listening to the conversation. Listen to a lot of these conversations. Let's join in on the political process. This is not our political process. Never has been. Never will be. This political process is a process to strip you of all of your humanity. Strip you of your dignity. Strip you of your identity. Strip you of your resources. Strip you of everything that you are. And if you're a chief, a reverend, if you are a minister in charge of a church, and you are combining yourselves with a system that was designed to take everything away from you and still is, then you're part of the problem. Hate to say it. So you got to think about it. Everybody that's out there, everybody that's out there, who's part of the problem? Why aren't your societies getting better? I was just talking to a few people. My kids live down there over there in Baltimore. They're talking about how bad Baltimore is. Are there any really good places in Baltimore? You know, they're talking about Detroit now. Now Detroit just had an upsurge, and the change of demographics over there, where more whites and Hispanics are moving in, and they have an opportunity to be able to move in because all the housing out there is so cheap. They're moving all the blacks out. So if you don't get in your co-creation communities, you're going to be out of luck. And you might be out of luck already, because what happens is that when you talk about this reparation situation, you also talk about all the other things that are going on in our society. Right? All the other things are going on in our society. And when you talk about all the other things going on in our society, such as all these heat waves, all the flooding, the food shortages that are going to be happening, and they're going to be happening already. You know, there's a lot of things I tell you on this show, then people say, "Oh, that's not going to happen." Well, a lot of the things I've already told you are happening right now, right? Happening right now. They're happening right now, and if we don't get our minds, don't get our bodies, don't get our heads in the right place of co-creation, we're going to be out of luck. Not only out of luck, but we're going to be out of time. And then the atmosphere, the universe, is going to do whatever needs to be done to put whoever is ready into place to move forward. My whole entire thing here with this inner movement, this inner movement forward process, forward moving process, is to get as many people as possible to be able to be co-creators, so that they will be able to really make that transition from a carbon-12 to a carbon-7 being. So we have to insulate ourselves. We have to begin to put ourselves in an insulation. They don't want us insulated. They need us exposed like a live wire. And pretty soon, the whole world is going to be exposed like a live wire, because it's going to have us all entrapped. And until we unplug ourselves from the system, we don't have any say-so. We don't have any say-so. Remember, we're not like the Native Americans. We're not government regulated. Right? And the name that they gave us, American Indians, we're protected. And we're protected for a reason, because we are the original beings on this earth. We are the original beings of this land. And then and it gets into a lot more stuff getting into that when you start talking about the original beings. So this is the things that I want people to understand. I want people to understand that, you know, before you talk about reparations, as they're talking about this, I want you to really listen. I want you to really pay attention. Because they're leading you down a rabbit hole. They're treating you like mice in one of those those rat mazes. You're not a mice, you're not a rat, and you're not a rabbit. And you don't need to go down no hole. What you do need to do is put up a litmus test and say, who cares about me and my children? Who cares about me and my children and my future? Who cares about us? Who really loves us? You know, who's really going to help stop the killing out there in these streets? Co-creation communities. Who's going to stop the bad education of our people? Co-creation communities. Who's going to really stop the GMOs from taking place in our farmlands? Co-creation communities. And anyone who is advocating for co-creation communities in any part of this North America land, no matter where they may be. We need to be able to combine ourselves so that we will be able to take care of our youth, train our youth, and give them an understanding as to where we're going. Because in this world of all this craziness, I mean, it's a lot more crazy. I mean, I know, remember my grandparents were talking, you know, grand uncles and stuff like that, and my parents were talking and stuff like that. They were saying how the world was changing and stuff like that. Well, this ain't nothing like, we ain't seen nothing like this before. Right? With all this genetic manipulation, with all these vaccines, with all these viruses popping up all over the place and now out of control. We need to put ourselves in co-creation communities, And these are the things that need to be done before you even begin to start talking about reparations. And if you ain't talking like this, then you're not talking anything. You're just talking status quo because you're talking in their language. You're talking in their framework. They framed the language for you and you're using their language. I'm using our language. So the first thing we need to do is understand that there's a larger history than just slavery. That we are prisoners of war and they killed over 100 million of our people, and it's about the destruction of civilizations. Not just a few slaves. Those that did come off the boat and were put in a difficult situation, excuse me, such as slavery conditions, they're with us too because they're part of our job to protect them. They're part of it too. Shared some of that pain. But a lot of the pain goes into 100 million of us, 100 million of our forefathers, of our ancestors, of our great-great-great-grandfathers and great-great-great-grandmothers, all the way up into the 1920s and all the way up to today, that have been killed in this great war to genocide us off the planet of the earth. It goes into what you call this genetics, which was once called eugenics. They changed the word eugenics to genetics. And the genetics was to change the genetic properties of people to either weed them out or to enhance them. It goes much deeper than a lot of things because it goes into the destruction of our civilization. And this is what we need to be able to reclaim, which are purposely being hidden in those parks, which are being used by the UN and by other national military, such as Russia, China, and a lot of Germany, and a few others. It goes into, we cannot talk about reparations until we talk about co-creation communities and establishing a Grand Council, a Grand Congress, and unifying us under many flags, under one voice, one representation, under one council, many flag, one council, many flag, one Congress. It doesn't matter what you call it. Co-creation communities built all around the country so that way we will be able to sustain ourselves. We cannot talk about that. Once we have the Grand Council, then we can begin to start going to the UN, going to the outside world and be able to start negotiating what we need to negotiate and demanding and telling them what we're doing. There's much, much more than reparations. See, we're going to be leading the fight to get rid of the doctrine of discovery, which has to end in order for any decolonization to be able to stick. Because you can get decolonized, but still be under the doctrine of discovery. And if you're under the doctrine of discovery, you still don't own any of your land. It still goes to the Vatican and the European nations, who are in charge of putting the doctrine of discovery into effect. And then it goes into whoever they deem was worthy to be able to rule those lands as well, that was supporting them and those who created the doctrine of discovery. So once we have our framework, our skeleton framework in place, which is building up now, we're able to talk about reparations. We're able to talk about decolonization. We're able to talk about the end of the doctrine of discovery. And once we have our Grand Council, once we have our Congress, we're able to then link with other carbon-based beings around the world and create our own United Nations that will be able to talk to that other system. Because we'll be out of that system. Then we need to be able to talk to that other system. And we have to talk to them as equals. See, you can't talk to them as equals as long as the doctrine of discovery is in place. You got to get rid of the doctrine of discovery. And then there's so many other things that we have to consider. And this is the reason why we have to concentrate very heavily on making this transition from a carbon-12 to a carbon-7 being, so that way we can take care of any other soulful things that are going on in order for us to be able to rule ourselves again. That's what needs to be done. That's what needs to be done. And it's very important for us to understand that. And until we do, we'll find ourselves in a situation as to where we're just going to be going around and round and round and round in a circle. Round and around and around in the circle. So, I thank you for listening. This is Ronnie McLean for Dark Matter Radio. A new thunder for I.N.N.A. And we are making strides to be able to do what we need to do to be able to move ourselves forward. So before you talk about reparations, and when you do talk about reparations, find out exactly who is talking co-community relationships. Find out. As I bid you all a good evening, a good night, a good morning, a good afternoon, wherever you may be on this beautiful earth of ours. I love you all, and may you all be blessed beyond measure. Again, this is Ronnie McLean for Dark Matter Radio. Have a good night.